Good day, ladies and gentlemen. I must say I'm really pleased when Mr. Blahinka was showing the train that we were at least in the first class, that we were not at the end. Just to say about vertical farms, well, actually it will be interesting for farmers, but not only we cut down numbers of cattle, we've reduced agricultural production, but we've managed to reduce know-how. So we no longer have a research institute which would dedicate their efforts to growing vegetables. And we no longer have people who could learn farmers how to grow vegetables. So we have to go back to getting experts. Let's talk about my presentation, how Europe is trading with agricultural commodities. I was asked to mention that, so thank you for the invitation. And my presentation is cut into 4 parts. First, we'll touch upon trends. I'll follow up to 4 speakers. Second, Europe as an important foodstuff producer. Number 3, Europe getting more and more open. And last one, competitiveness in Europe. So, this is the slide showing the influence on Czech agricultural production. Let me mention just a couple of points. Number 1, this is a study called Metadata Study, published by EC, and it speaks about estimates of growth of production of foodstuffs. Of course, there are several aspects, not only environmental and economic aspects, but also the change of consuming habits of inhabitants, or how to replace meat. You know that there are vegetarian hamburgers, and we will not produce meat, and animals will not be bred in fields but in the lab. So, still, the consumption of foodstuffs will increase. And if you look at figures, grain should raise by 24%, corn 33%, rice increase by 33%, poultry 4%, pork 10%, and cattle 34%. I'm speaking about cattle because people are discussing whether we shouldn't reduce counts of cattle because they are emitting greenhouse gases. This is something which is highly improbable, and the demand for cattle will increase. However, this is the reality, and we keep hearing this problem. Those people are speaking about the environmental protection, and they do not take into consideration other aspects, like if you reduce the number of cattle, then the fodder area will decrease and the organic mass in the soil will disappear. It means the soil itself will deteriorate. So this is the consumption of foodstuffs, both meat and plants in those circles, showing development till 2030, and it's kilocalorie per day per person. The dark ones, developing countries, large circle, developed countries. So you see that the circle is not increasing too much. What's more interesting is those levels, columns. If you look at columns, this shows consumption of foodstuffs in China, and you see the growth. And today the animal protection came close to countries like US, Europe. This is Europe, 925 calories, and the richest industrial countries. Next to China, these are the least developed countries in a given year, and even this is growing, and those predictions are that if a Chinese will dream his own American dream, we will need 1.5 billion tons of grain each and every year, which is still more than it was published in a study published by the EC. What I'm trying to say is that we are in a situation when the foodstuffs consumption is growing, and to speak in this relation that we have to curb intensity of agriculture in Europe seems like a nonsense, because there is a demand and someone's got to cover it. A couple of figures, I'll skip it because it would take too long. Just one. This is specific figure. A Chinese in town consumed 30 kilo of meat, milk and eggs, and 2011 it was nearly 50. It means nearly twice as much.
Co se týká těch informací,
Information,
základních informací,
basic
o něm
information
se bude mluvit
about
využití
possible development
vhodné půdy
of
nebo
appropriate
pro
arable
produkci,
land for
pro produkci potravin.
foodstuffs
Ačkoliv
production.
dochází ve světě k degradaci, tak se
Even
rovná
if there is a
zemědělské půdy, tak
degradation
každá
of
studie na
agricultural
základě
land, this study, based on FAO, presumes that there will be an increase of arable land by 5%, 70 million hectares, and the extension will be done in Africa and Latin America. And in relation to Mercosur, it's no surprise, and they will burn out rainforests to create arable land, and they will plant plants covering the demand for foodstuffs. EU as foodstuffs producer. My four speakers mentioned that Europe is strongly integrated into the world foodstuffs and commodities trade, and it's worth 260 billion of euros in 2018, and since 2018 the value nearly doubled. There is a huge increase, and Europe is the biggest exporter of foodstuffs in the world, taking EU as a whole, but the second importer of foodstuffs, but mainly basic raw materials in the world. More than 30% of raw materials are imported out of Europe.
Tady vidíte, kdo jsou největší vývozci
Top
tohle
world
na světě.
agri-food
Na prvním místě
exporters.
teda, jak už jsem řekl, je Evropská
Number
unie
one,
28.
European 28, second United States, third Brazil, fourth China, and five Canada. If you look up top world agri-food importers, number one United States, but it could be comparable to EU. China is increasing because the population is getting richer, so China increases agricultural production plus import. Japan and Canada. What's more interesting is that if we look at the structure of agri-food trade of the EU, you can see different colors, and what's above the black line is imports and below exports. The first two parts, colored in green, show basic foodstuffs. This is what Europe exports. The proportion could be 30%, and here imported stuff, and this is a massive part. In another word, Europe is pragmatic, importing cheap raw materials, processes them for foodstuffs, and gives them added value as European 28. Mr. Pýcha showed the example of flowers being transported from Kenya via Netherlands, because Kenyan farmers have quite different legislative conditions.
Taking a look at the export by destination, Europe is quite successful in exporting foodstuffs to the US. China is second, followed by Switzerland, Japan, and the orange column stands for Russia. It shows quite a significant drop. Also in consequence to some trade sanctions. What is also interesting, and it was mentioned by Mr. Shir, Mr. Toman and Mr. Doležal, and that is the question, who affects the export? If you take a look at the numbers of exporters and the worth of the export, you can see that the largest share is that of the large agribusinesses. This stands for the medium-sized establishments and the small and micro ones. That is quite a discrepancy. So if Europe sets the agricultural policy by reducing subsidies to large businesses and helping the small ones, then the large businesses will be harmed, and they are very important suppliers to the domestic market as well. The largest importer today, the largest import today is from the United States, which has surpassed the imports from Brazil. The Brazilian exports to the European Union have dropped, while the US export has increased. Ukraine and Argentina are quite important importers as well. If you add Argentina to Brazil, you will get a very important share in the import of foodstuffs, especially raw materials. Well, Europe is increasingly open. The Union is negotiating trade agreements with more and more countries. It looks quite clever at first sight. Importing cheap raw materials, processing them, adding value, that's positive for Europe. It may look like that. The question is, who do we sign agreements with, and what's the outcome of it? We have agreements with 120 countries of the world, negotiating with more. Mercosur is just about to conclude, Vietnam, Chile, and others, including Ukraine. We should take into account another thing. What's going on here may look very positive macroeconomically, but it greatly affects the prices of the final products, which reduces the profitability of European agriculture. The costs are growing, production stagnates, basically. Taking a look at the agro-business of the European Union with Ukraine, imports, as you can see, massively consist of raw materials. And if we take a look at the structure of agrarian business with the EU countries, then we do not look very well. We export livestock, live dairy products, we import meat products, and meat itself constitutes 1/2 of the negative balance of our agro-trade. So, by exporting raw materials, basically, similarly to Ukraine or Mercosur, the imports can have a very significant effect on our agriculture. Europe imported 22 billion euros worth of foodstuffs from Mercosur, and we only exported there about 2.5 billion worth. This is the structure of agro-trade of the European Union with Brazil. Seemingly, it's just a small fraction of our total consumption, so the market should be able to absorb it. But it affects prices, and we should also beware that the Czech customer minds price very much, while a French consumer is buying French cheese and is not interested in Czech cheese at all. The Czech customer wants to buy cheap. I have taken only one commodity from Mercosur to show the competitive position of the European and Brazilian producers of poultry. The Brazilian price is a half of that in Europe. And the import amounts to the total of the domestic production of Finland, Denmark, and Sweden. And there's a great difference in phytosanitary protection and other elements. This is a comparison between Europe, the US, and Brazil. Here are production costs by the country. And the European Union has the highest column. Another subject, we should reduce pesticides. The Commission is going to publish the pledge of pesticide reduction by 2030. I like targets, but we should be aware of how we arrive at the target. When there's no replacement, it could be devastating. Look at the use of pesticides in the countries we've been talking about. They all use more pesticides per hectare than the European Union. So, by this target, we can increase the costs on the part of the farmers, we can reduce profit, we will reduce market, because of the prohibition in effect in the European Union, but we can hardly control this in other parts of the world. So this is why we refuse this kind of agreement. It may not affect the West European farmers very much, but it will affect Czech agriculture. I'll dwell on this. This is a graph I showed to the MEPs last week. We all talk about subsidies per area, not mentioning that all the farmers have to comply with the so-called basic conditionalities. That is, the payments per area involve certain costs. In Germany, it's 315 euros per hectare, and the average payment in Germany is a little less than 300. And that has to do with such countries as the US, Mercosur, New Zealand, and the like. So this is the cost of compliance with the basic conditions as against the countries to which we are opening up. That suggests that we cannot expect this is not going to affect our farmers. If we reduce the subsidies on CAP, if we reduce the compensation and open the market, it will inevitably affect the competitiveness of European agriculture. Every month, 1,000 farmers wrap it up. This is the breakdown to individual areas, needless to describe. When talking about support and subsidies, let us see what subsidies the farmers enjoy in Brazil. The Brazilian farming budget altogether is 47 billion euros per year. The Brazilian Minister of Agriculture decided to invest 68.5 billion euros into animal husbandry. So we are going to reduce production because of the greenhouse gas emissions, while the Brazilians will increase their production. Brazil is spending 234 euros per citizen on its agribusiness. And my time is up, so I will not describe subsidies in the United States. And I'll spend a few words on the concentration of farm production, because that has to do with competitiveness. In the United States, total number of slaughterhouses was reduced from 10,000 to 3,000 from 1967 to 2000. The Brazilian JBS, which is the largest meat processor in the world, is able to slaughter 85,000 cattle. And let us take a look at the number of pig producers in the US. The number of producers was reduced by 70% from 1992 to 2009, while keeping the amount of production. Europe says, let us remove the large concentrated establishments and prefer nice small farms. But who is going to do this kind of business, and how can they sell the products? This runs contrary to the trends worldwide. The number of dairy cows in Bavaria dropped 35% in the last 10 years. Competitiveness is a problem, which is why the German dairy businesses like to buy Czech milk because the quality is fine and it's safe. And this is the last graph. Seemingly favorable trade agreements affect the prices of producers. The prices have hardly grown at all. About 30%, while the cost of inputs into agriculture has grown to about 500%. How long do you think farmers will be able to stand this? If the income, of an average farmer in the European Union is at 42% of the average income in general. It is not as serious in Czechia. It's about 75%. Seemingly, we are well off, but we miss young people to join in. So if we keep on pressing on farmers because of the environmental requirements, believing that the farmers will carry the burden, I don't think this can last very long. Thank you for your attention. I'm open to your questions.